That's very generous. I must say, being described as a renowned presidential historian is like being described as the best restaurant in a hospital. You want to win, but it's not that hard. So thank you. And I was listening to those kind words, Madam President, and future President Morris, who was brilliant out there. And I was thinking, yeah, I am all those things, and maybe you're not being fulsome enough. When my mind went back, it's been about 11 years ago now, I was on the Washington Mall at the National Book Festival, and a woman ran up to me, which doesn't happen enough, or ever, actually. And she said, "Oh my God, it's you." And I said, "Well, yes, existentially speaking, that's hard to argue with. And this may be the one place in Massachusetts where I can use existential as an adverb, so be with me here. It's also a diversity. You have a Tennessean speaking to you, so you are, in fact, reaching out, e pluribus unum. There's one other Tennessean here. That's good. And so the woman, she said, I love your books. They've meant so much to me. Will you wait right here? I'm going to go buy your new book and have you sign it." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And I thought, this is the way the world is supposed to be. Women run up to you, they buy your book. It's a twofer. Hand to God, she brought back John Grisham's latest novel. So, whenever I think I'm the most prominent anything, I remind myself that somewhere in America there's a woman with a forged copy of The Runaway Jury, right? Because you have to sign it, you can't embarrass her. That's a true story. There's a quick addendum to it. I was writing a book about President Bush Sr. at that point, and the next day I was on my way to Maine to see the Bushes, and I was having lunch with them, and I told the story to George Herbert Walker Bush and Barbara Bush in what I will confess to you, my new co-alumni, was a transparent attempt to have the president or the first lady say, "Oh, you're so much more an important figure than John Grisham." I was totally fishing, Barbara Bush looked across the table in that inimitable way of hers and said, "Well, how do you think poor John Grisham would feel? He's a very handsome man." So it was a bad weekend. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm well aware that I'm the only thing between you all and the rest of your lives. You all is Southern for you. We're going to provide simultaneous translation. So I will be brief, but it is fitting to take a moment to think about where you've been and where you're headed. You're going to encounter an infinity of joys and sorrows, hopefully more of the former than the latter. But one thing is certain, is that you're going to carry everything you've learned here through all the length of days. Now, I'm a historian, someone who tries to take the chaos of the past, what William James called the blooming, buzzing confusion of reality, in order to make something new and resonant. And history and tradition are not infallible. But we have nowhere else to begin our deliberations about what we should do, except with the fact of what we have done. And so consider this. If the men and women of the past, with all their flaws and limitations and ambitions and appetites, could press on through superstition and ignorance, through racism and sexism, through selfishness and greed, to form a more perfect union, then perhaps we can too. The world has already turned over many times since you have been in it. So let's begin at the beginning. Many of you who are receiving your degrees today were born about 1996-97, right? Bill Clinton was president. Donald Trump was starring in a Pizza Hut commercial. Whether we've made progress is a question that you all have to settle later. I sometimes wonder, Henry Adams once said this, I sometimes wonder that whether we're from Reagan and Bush to where we are now, in fact, disproves Darwin. But again, I'm a Tennessean, so I have to leave the state to talk about Darwin. It's a statute. Anyway, the biggest movie of the year when you were born was Titanic. That competed against The Lost World, Jurassic Park, Men in Black, Liar, Liar, Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery, and sadly, Beverly Hills Ninja. Can't win them all. On television, ER, Seinfeld, and Friends dominated the culture. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was just over 7,000. You were in your first years of formal education when terror struck us out of a brilliant blue sky on Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. You were beginning your secondary years when Barack Obama became the first African-American president in American history. And you were here in 2016 when America elected the most unconventional president in the long history of the Republic. So you understand history. You've already lived through a good bit of it. The world you're entering, sadly, is one of division and self-absorption. We stare at screens, we filter our news to our ideological predispositions, we offer reflexive opinions without much thought and ever-increasing fervor. And yet our common welfare depends not on what separates us, but on what unifies us. And that may sound like a cliche or something you'd read on a coffee mug or a needlepoint pillow, but it is an ancient truth. St. Augustine once defined a nation as a multitude of rational beings united by the common objects of their love. United by the common objects of their love. So, at the end of the second decade of the 21st century, what do we love in common? The painful but unavoidable answer is not enough. Yet history, I'd argue, has the capacity to bring us together, or at least the possibility of bringing us together. For the story of the American journey, for all of its sins and omissions, is ultimately the story of obstacles overcome, crises resolved, freedom expanded. We've always grown in strength the more widely we've opened our arms, and the more we've opened our hearts. So what can we learn from the past in order to engage the present and shape the future? That the perfect should not be the enemy of the good. That compromise is the oxygen of democracy. And that we learn the most from those who came before, not by looking up at them uncritically or down on them condescendingly, but by looking them in the eye and taking their true measure as human beings, not as irredeemable villains or godlike heroes. Arm yourselves for your own hour upon the stage with a sense of entrepreneurial citizenship, a devotion to the pursuit of happiness, not only for yourself, but for your families, your friends, your neighbors, near and far, known and unknown. Great change in America comes when engaged and creative people decide that the way things are isn't the way always that they should be, and who then form dispositions of heart and mind to reflect the virtues of fair play and human decency. The abolitionists who campaigned against slavery, the suffragists who fought for the ballot for women, which, by the way, has not quite hit its century mark. That'll be next year. The children who rose up from a segregated South and demanded that the Jeffersonian assertion of human equality naturally applied to all, not only to some. These are your models. Study them well, learn from them, emulate them. And if you do, you might just change the world. Now, if that seems overly grand or hopelessly gauzy, remember this. They did it not so long ago, and they were just like you. They were flawed but devoted, imperfect but determined, few in number but strong in spirit. Despite the partisan ferocity of the moment, if we listen closely, very closely, we can hear the music of Lincoln's better angels of our nature. Your task in all the years ahead is to keep an ear attuned for those notes. Springfield has taught you how to hear that music. Never shut it off. Now, one of the most important sentences ever written in the English language was written by Thomas Jefferson in the late spring, early summer of 1776, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is a sentence that has changed more lives around the world and continues to do so than any other originally rendered in English. I am also very careful when I make hyperbolic claims like that about the most important sentence in the English language, partly because of the old story about the Texas school board candidate who was against teaching Spanish in the public schools and said on the stump, "If English was good enough for our Lord Jesus Christ, it's good enough for Texas." So I'm from Tennessee. If it weren't for us, they'd still be part of Spain. So I can say that. First time I met George W. Bush, he was governor of Texas, and I made that joke. I said, if it weren't for me, sir, y'all'd still be a province of Spain. He went, "That's pretty funny, jerk." It was the beginning of a beautiful friendship, I promise. The greatest obstacle to hearing those better angels at the moment is a rising sense of tribalism in America. Those motivated by what they see as extremism on the other side, and this is a universal problem. Not about right, not about left, it's universal. What they see as extremism on the other side are likelier to see politics not as a mediation of difference, but as existential warfare where no quarter can be given. The country works best, though, when we resist such tribal impulses. For wisdom, I would argue, generally comes from a free exchange of ideas. And there can be no free exchange of ideas if everyone on your side already agrees with each other and thinks the other guys are beneath contempt. So, quickly, here's my advice for you and it's at once historically based, and I promise it's heartfelt, and it's from my middle age to your youth. Please, please, don't let any single cable network or Twitter feed tell you what to think. Do that for yourself. A final word. Be curious, be gracious, be hopeful. If you're so inclined, say your prayers and seek the means of grace and the hope of glory. Love your neighbor. Take naps outside on summer afternoons. Read Jane Austen and Anthony Trollope, and as many detective stories as you can find. Go to the movies, the kinds where you buy a ticket and you go in. Ask your parents if you need to know what that is. Subscribe to newspapers and magazines. Ask your teachers what a newspaper and a magazine are. Vote in each and every election. I'm a Southerner. If you have to vote more than once, that's fine. Just don't get caught. Sorry about that. They're going to take the hood back in a minute. Never be embarrassed to put your hand over your heart and join in when the band strikes up the national anthem. This one's important. Write thank you notes on actual paper. They make it from trees. We'll explain it to you later. And try to look up from those phones. Above all, remember in hours of joy and of darkness that a life well lived is judged not by the bottom line, but by the big picture. Godspeed to you all.